Thank you so much. That was really lovely. It's always nice to be introduced not just by the event organizer, but by somebody who's genuinely a friend. That's great. And I never get tired of hearing the spinach smoothie story. I'm excited to be here with you. We're going to talk about, there we go. Share with you some of what we've been learning about the importance of listening. There we go. And you'll see right up here on the title slide some really key things. So Future of Faith is the organization that I started. We lead with a lot of research. You're going to see a lot of research today. But that is not where we live. At Future of Faith, we're really trying to sort of live on the other side of the line of action, meaning like what does this research, what do we do with all this stuff, all this data, all these numbers, all these quotes? And how do we activate it in a way that might actually be useful for people like you, who are doing the real hard work of ministry on the ground? That will all come from my perspective as a sociologist, and we're going to talk just briefly about what that means, because you'll probably have to adapt it. One of the key commitments that we have at Future of Faith, though, is that all of that stuff that we make, including the research, it's all free. It's all for you. You can have it. It's under a Creative Commons license. You can use it in whatever way you want to. And that includes this entire presentation. So over the next 3 or 4 hours, I'm going to share a lot of data. No, I'm kidding. We have 35 minutes, and we're going to move pretty quickly. So there's a QR code there. If you want to download the slides, you're more than welcome to. You will see this again at the end of the presentation. So if you want to wait and see if you like what I said before you actually scan the thing, that's fine. And then you have my email address there as well. Megan, my co-founder, and I, she's just Megan at Future of Faith. We're always available. So if you have a question, if you want to know something that we didn't cover that maybe you wanted to know more about, feel free to email me at any time. Sound good? Okay. So I said I was a sociologist. We'll start there. What does that mean? I think it's useful to at least just sort of level set why this sociological perspective matters, because it kind of informs everything that we did. If you have any experience with sociology, you probably remember it was the class that you took in undergrad that you loved but couldn't figure out how to make a career out of it. I did. I'm one of the 4. The easiest way to understand sociology is that your job is to pay attention to your tree, to what's right in front of you. It's your ministry, it's your kids, it's your parish, your neighborhood, whatever's in front, your campus, whatever your deal is. You have to focus on that all the time, because that's your day-to-day, it's what you're paid to do, it's where your expertise lives. My job is to pay attention to the forest. And I think this distinction is really important because there are things that happen at the forest level that impact our trees that we cannot control. But we do need to respond to them, right? We do need to be able to respond to them. And making sure that we understand what is ours to do, what is our tree thing to do that we can control, and what is not necessarily ours to do. It's a forest level, what we might call a culture or society thing that's impacting us. Well, that's important too, because we don't want to try and control or fix the culture things. We spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money trying to fix something that we can't fix as individuals. So a lot of what we're going to do today is to help sort of distinguish between what those two things are. And the reason why that perspective, I think, is really important and also very much missing is that when we take in information, we end up telling ourselves a story. Like we knit all this information together into a narrative. And the stories that we tell ourselves about the world really, really matter. And they matter not because it's important to be right or wrong for the sake of being right, but rather the stories that we tell ourselves about the world matter because they inform the actions that we take. So if we're telling ourselves a story about the world as unsafe, then we take all of these steps to protect ourselves, our children, our families, et cetera, et cetera. Did you know, by the way, that fully 74% of 16-year-olds are not allowed to leave their neighborhood without an adult? That is wild, right? So if you're telling yourself a story about the world as dangerous, you don't even let your 16-year-olds leave the neighborhood without an adult. Which is bonkers, by the way, because actually the world is safer than it's ever been, but that's an aside. So we want to tell ourselves some correct stories so we can take some effective actions. As this quote, I think, illustrates so beautifully, it's not Mark Twain, but it sounds like him because there's 2 ain'ts in it. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. If you read the headlines about religion, especially about religion and young people, you can end up telling yourself some pretty scary stories about young people. Mostly that they don't care about God, that faith is declining, that they're not interested in church, and on and on and on. I'm not so sure that that's the right story. And so you look at stuff like this. So anytime you see a slide that has this kind of background, this is a national study that we did at Future of Faith. And again, all this data is free. So we did this in 2024, and you can find it on our website. So I have no religious affiliation, 28%. So nearly a third. Only 57% say that they're a religious person, and 45% say that they actively participate in a faith community. And those are the things that sort of get headlines because those feel like big numbers. What we don't often talk about as much is these last two. Religion is important in my life. Spirituality is important in my life. Still 8 in 10 teenagers are saying that these things are really critical for who they are and how they process the world. And so when we filter everything through, and you've seen all the other kinds of headlines about church decline, and now you're starting to see some about maybe there's a revival that's happening. We just wrote about this in Christianity Today recently, about trying to make sense of all of that. But whenever we tell that story as a church, we tend to tell the story of what's going on with young people and these numbers or whatever numbers through the lens of our tree. The church tells a story like it's Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. Like it's the main character in everything, and everybody else in the world, every other organization and institution is sort of just, decoration. But when you think about the world the way sociologists do, we see the church as not necessarily, this isn't about importance, but we see it as situated amongst a whole bunch of other things that are also going on. It's more like Ocean's 11 than Mission Impossible. It's like an ensemble cast. You can figure out if the church is Tom Cruise, or is George Clooney or Brad Pitt or whatever, in that very tortured metaphor. And so when we tell ourselves the Tom Cruise story, and we look at the data about young people, we end up telling a belief story. That we only look at the data that we think is most relevant to us. The tree story tells us that young people are just not interested. But I don't think that that's what's happening. I think that largely when it comes to young people and their parents, by the way, we're going to talk a lot about their parents today too. What we're really living in is a trust story. People don't believe less than they used to. They trust less than they used to. Leadership Roundtable recently published a report, and they talking specifically just about the Catholic Church, talking about transparency as the number one priority for the future of the church. And I hold that up of like, this is a place where this forest and these trees sort of overlap and intermingle with each other. But when I tell you that we're living in a trust story, I'm not saying this as like, this is a thing I've sat around and thought about, and here's my conclusion. We get to this point from the data. So when we look at confidence in institutions, this is from Gallup, going all the way back to the 1970s. You can go back further if you want. We can track these things because we've been asking more or less the same survey questions. What trend do you notice? Yeah, good. I made you, I made you a cheat sheet, right? Now, if we're looking at the tree story, it's the red arrow. Like your eyes might go just to that bottom row and look at organized religion, but I would encourage you to pay attention to the forest story, which is the blue arrow. If all we were seeing is that every other institution was doing the same or better, while organized religion was in decline in terms of trust, this would be a whole different presentation. In fact, I wouldn't be the one to give it, because we'd be having to have a conversation about, how do we fix the church, because the church is clearly screwed up. And that's not my realm of expertise. But when I see these data, I come to a different conclusion than the church didn't screw up. Something is happening in our culture that forces us, or causes us rather, to not trust institutions generally. So if you've been working in the church for a long time, maybe this comes as somewhat of a relief. You didn't break it. You didn't break it. But it's a forest story. It also means that you can't fix it. But you are, I think, responsible for understanding this environment and thinking through how the church can be effective in this world in the same way that it was effective in the 1950s, which was a different kind of world. And I'm going to argue to you today, I mean, not like argue with you, but I'm going to try and make the case today that I think we need new tools for this new world. We can look at this also through the lens of professionals. And we can see that this is, I just picked 2019 to show you how much this is declining, how rapidly. And again, there's a tree story here about clergy, but there's a forest story about all professions, that we simply don't trust them as much. When I was showing this to my students, and I was talking about my dad who grew up Catholic neighborhood, Catholic parish, he's still Catholic, cradle to grave. And I'd asked my dad, like, who would you have trusted growing up? And he said, I would have trusted the priest. And I said, oh, which priest? And he's like, not like a person, like whoever the priest was, I would have trusted, not like a named person. And when I told that to my students, they were like laughing, literally out loud, at the idea. And I said, wait, what's so funny about that? And they said, your dad would just trust somebody who was standing like in the front of the room, like because they had a title and a position? And I was like, yes, and you should too. I did not find it as funny as they did. They thought it was absurd. And you can even see in my response to my dad, the question back was like, what's his name? And he was like, I don't understand the question. That's how much this world has shifted from the 1950s to today. Like our default assumptions are different. It's hard to even talk to each other, right? It's no wonder then that the tools that were so awesome in the 1950s may not be the right tools for 2020s. And let's look at so again, these are data that we collected. We asked people, who do you have trust for? And adults said only 26% of them said they had high trust for corporations and organizations, 16% of teens, 32% leaders and bosses, 27% teens. And if you can help me explain this, please do, because I have no idea what this means, but 23% of adults more trust social media influencers than teenagers, to which my 16-year-old son was like, well, we all know they're lying. But I find that to be just an astonishing that adults are higher than that. At the same time, there are some things that I think are really critical for your work that hold true. We've always known that the number one biggest influence on a teenager's faith is their parents. That is still true. That data point has not changed much. It has declined. Like, they're not as influential as they used to be, but they're still the most important thing. So, which many of you have heard, like your job is not, like you are not the primary formator of the young people that you work with. Their parents are, for better or worse. For better or worse. Your job is to be alongside them. And this is true. This is, by the way, what AI thinks parents look like. But this is true across racial and ethnic lines as well. This is what AI thinks diverse parents look like. Which I find to be very amusing. I made it do the we're number one part. But we can see that these numbers hold really strongly. Like it's when you look at the third line down there is the Catholics. How many of the parents who say their children have the same religion as them is 91%. Right? So if you're trying to do ministry if you're trying to do ministry, youth ministry, and young adult ministry, children's ministry, anything like that, without involving parents, I mean, you're probably swimming upstream at some level. Now, thankfully, I want to point out that a lot of these things that we saw, like when we talked about the decline of trust from the 1950s to today, it's not like somehow things were going great until pick a year, 2017 or something, and then it fell off a cliff. It's been eroding steadily. So when we talk about young people growing up in a low trust world, well, their parents have also grown up in a low trust world. Okay? This notion of like generations are containers that somehow each one is distinct from the other, that's never been really true, and it's less true now than it's ever been. The world is so diverse, urban, rural, black, white, different religions, people are online, offline. Like, trying to say that, all of Gen X is like this and all of millennials are like that, it's folly. A lot of the ministry techniques that work for your teenagers are also going to be working for your young adults and even for their parents. especially the stuff that we're going to talk about today. But parents are also very, very overwhelmed. So this is also some research that we did as part of an ecumenical working group. How important are each of the following to teach your children? And you see we had parents rank these. So responsibility, hard work, well-mannered, helping others, blah, 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 blah. Very bottom, spirituality, religious faith. How concerned or worried are you about the following? Being bullied, exposure to harmful content, being kidnapped or abducted, getting beaten up, safety, 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 safety. Losing faith or religion at the bottom. And then lastly, along these slides, how important is it that your children do each of the following as adults? Careers, financially independent. Most of these are just like, please get out of my house at some point. Earn a college degree. And then we get to faithful religious. And at the bottom is even like having similar religious beliefs, right? So they're worried about a whole bunch of things. But they're not necessarily, like faith doesn't necessarily rise to the top of them for parents, and yet they still exert a tremendous influence over them. And when I said that they're like these parents were formed in a low trust era, this even showed up in our qualitative study. So we not only did a survey, but then we started interviewing people. Christopher says it this way. He says, I don't tend to trust authority figures. I would definitely be more likely to listen to someone who I felt was listening to how I was feeling. This is the sentiment of the parents who are raising these kids that you're working with, right? And in their eyes, like you are an authority figure. Your priest is an authority figure. And they're not inclined to default trust you in the same way that my dad default trusted the priest with the collar, or that my students should have trusted me. Now, what's weird about that is that I was standing in the front of the room of an upper class, this is a 300, 400 level sociology of religion class. So I knew most of the students in there. And they knew me. And they knew that this wasn't transactional for me, that I really wanted the best for them and I had their best interests in mind. But that didn't come through unless they were sitting in my office in conversation. But in the classroom setting, I could get compliance because I had their grades at stake, right? But I wanted to be like Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society. Like I wanted to change their lives. So to get that influence, it took something other than just my positional authority. And that was a key insight that was unlocked for us, was that trust hasn't disappeared, but it has relocated. Institutional trust has declined, no doubt. There's less of it than there's ever been. But trust has not gone away. It's just that now it has been pushed all the way down to the individual relationship. I trust the person that I know and that has listened to me, so I can trust that they know me. We did this in 2024. Everything I've seen since the survey, in the 18 months, 2 years since the survey went out in the field, only confirms more that I think we're headed in this direction. So in an AI world where nothing online can be trusted as authentic, in-person, interpersonal is going to matter more and more and more. Edelman, which releases this big trust study every year called the Edelman Trust Barometer, so that it noted this same shift starting to happen like a decade ago, that trust was shifting from traditional authorities to peers. And I think all you need to know about that is that, how often do you go to a doctor and then ask your friends, I went to the doctor for my shoulder, and your friend was like, oh, my shoulder hurt too, and you're like, oh, what did you do? Because you drive Uber for a living, and so you probably know about my shoulder. But we do. So I showed you this already, but what I didn't show you was this last line, people I have a relationship with. When we say trust isn't disappearing, it's shifting, how do we then shift our ministries to take advantage of this new kind of trust? If trust is being located in different places, is our ministries aligned in that direction? Aubrey says, I think it's a lot easier to trust somebody if you feel heard. There's a safety that comes with that relationship. And Katie, 20 years old, backs us up. Definitely makes me want to continue with the conversation or be open to sharing more when I know someone actually cares. This leads us at Future of Faith to this position that high trust tools are not very effective in a low trust world. It does not mean that they were bad. It just means that some of the stuff that worked in the 50s, 60s, 70s is not going to work in 2020. I grew up, was confirmed in the Lutheran church. I told you my dad was Catholic. My mom was Lutheran. We had a coin flip at the dinner room table. My mom won. Although you know how moms are. If she had lost, we were going for 2 out of 3. I don't think my dad had a chance. We did lock-ins. Has anybody here ever done a lock-in? Those are great. If you're under the age of 30, here's what would happen. Parents would drive their kids to the church. They would leave them in the building at 5 o'clock. There would be somewhere between 10 and 20 pizzas and unlimited amounts of caffeine, and then the parents would go away. And theoretically, there was an adult supervisor, maybe one for every 300 children, in the church building. And then we would stay up all night in the church. Imagine trying to sell that to your parents now. Like, no chance, right? I mean, in most contexts, like, that is not, we did that all the time. I went like 3 a year. I would go to my friends' lock-ins at other churches across town. It was incredible. It's a high-trust tool. A broadcast sermon is a high-trust tool, right? A lecture that I was giving in front of my class is a high-trust tool. But in a low-trust world, we need different kinds of tools. It doesn't mean we toss those things out completely. It doesn't mean that they were bad or that we don't celebrate all the good that they did. But we need to start rebalancing these scales a little bit. Let me show you what I mean. 67% of people in our survey, this is adults, 67% said they grow in their faith or in spirituality when someone listens to me talk about my beliefs without judgment. Priests, cover your eyes. Only 46% said they grow in their faith when they hear a sermon. It's even more stark for teenagers. 33% said that they grow in their faith when they hear a sermon. 67% saying that somebody listening to them helps them to grow in their faith. That is I understand how radical that is, because those two things are fairly diametrically opposed, both in how we're trained and in how our previous activities go. I'm not suggesting that that is not wildly disruptive. I think it is. Low trust tools built around listening and relationships, though, according to the data, are the most promising way forward. And the reason that we've come to believe that is because what we've been hearing and seeing in the data, in our conversations, anecdotally, what I'm sure actually you all have probably felt in your one-on-one relationships with young people, even if you didn't have language for it, is that listening is formative. It's not just informative. Yes, you will get pieces of information. You will learn things about someone when you listen to them. But the act of letting them talk to you and work it out, that is formative in and of itself. I had a young person years ago tell me something that was like mildly alarming. They're like, I don't even really know how I think or what I believe about something until I say it out loud. I'm like, oh my God. Maybe you should journal about that. Like, maybe we don't need to say everything out loud. But that was her way of like working it out and working it out and working it out. And it stayed with me because we keep seeing it in the data. 8 in 10 agree that listening was important in the moments that shaped their faith the most. 65% say that being listened to has deepened their own faith. And 73% say when I feel listened to in conversations about faith or spirituality, it makes me more open to future conversations about faith and spirituality with that person. But this is a double-edged sword, because when they feel shut down, when they feel not listened to, then they withdraw. It's not just a nice to have. It actually becomes pretty essential. So we have come to this position that listening is actually the one thing that changes everything in this low trust world. I'm going to, before we break here and transition, I want to give you some so that's sort of the landscape level view of like why we come to this position that listening, what we say at Future Faith all the time is that listening is sacred. You can go on, this is the one pitch I'll make. We have shirts with it made. If you want to get a listening is sacred shirt to subtly convey to your teenagers to shut up and listen to you. No, I'm kidding. If you want to set a tone, we really do believe that listening is a sacred act, especially in a world where nobody feels like they're being heard. But let's get into some practical parts of this. So the data did reveal some sort of rules or best practices for listening. And the first one is to be relatable. So in that moment, how do you, if you're listening to somebody, how can you be relatable? Well, the biggest thing is that you want to try and avoid judgment. 81% said I feel more connected to someone when they listen without judgment. Fear of being judged for opinions is the biggest barrier to sharing. This is we don't have time to put up every slide, but this is basically the same for teenagers. It's like 78%, but also the number one barrier is judgment. This can be really hard when you're listening to young people especially, because it doesn't take long before they say some alarming things, and you feel like you want to correct them. And you have to resist that urge, especially at first, because that urge to correct or even sometimes to offer a different perspective feels like judgment for them. And again, remember, they might not have even known what they were thinking until they literally just said it out loud to you, and if you're already coming back in to correct, it sort of shuts down the future conversations. Second thing, I'm going to be reliable. I want to let them know they can count on you. That if you say you're going to do something, then you'll do the thing. I grow in my faith and spirituality when someone follows up to express care or concern. I trust someone more when they listen and follow up rather than simply sharing their thoughts. And remembering details from previous conversations is important to building trust. If something happened with one of your, if you have and maybe some of you do right now, like you have a young person in your community whose grandmother has just died, I'm sure that all of you would show up amazingly in that moment. It's what you're trained to do. It's maybe why you got into this in the first place. Somebody did that for you, and you love being able to be that person today for young people. There's no doubt that you all would do an excellent job of showing up. But what about a year from now? Who would show up a year from now? Just to text or to call or to see them at church and say, hey, I bet maybe this is a hard time for you. Your grandmother, the first anniversary of your grandmother's death is coming up. Would you like to have coffee? And, how are things going? That's a much harder ask. I'm 48 and I can barely remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. And when we asked youth ministers, what do they use to keep track of these conversations, the thing that they tell us, number one, nothing. They just try to remember them. Number two was the Notes app on their phone, which doesn't necessarily do a good job of giving you good reminders. When I say we don't have good tools for this low trust era, we do not have good tools for this low trust era. We need to get more sophisticated about them. 2 years ago at the 10 by 10 conference, I had a youth minister say, I don't even ask my kids about their events that are coming up anymore because I know I won't be able to remember them, and I don't want them to think that I didn't care. Right? So because he knows that being reliable is really important, but he doesn't have the tools to do it. The third, be curious. I value your story. 76% said asking reflective questions. This is like 72% for kids, a little bit lower, teenagers. Asking reflective questions about how faith relates to life challenges is a top thing that listeners can do. To help someone integrate faith into their daily life. So when we say on that first one that you want to listen without judgment, it doesn't mean that you can't ask questions, right? They sort of expect you at some level to be asking questions and be curious, and you can even ask those questions in a way that is faith-informed. It doesn't just have to be like, and then what did you do? And then what did you do? You can ask more pointed questions like, how is faith shaping the way that you think about this next chapter? Or what do you think God wants from you in this situation? That are not necessarily a commentary on what they've been doing or experiencing or what they're trying to work out for you, but are more about trying to push into new areas. This is the way that listening ends up becoming both formative at their own working it out, but also directive for you. The problem, though, is that so much of this relational ministry seems like it boils down to having cups of coffee with people. And maybe you work in a small setting, like maybe it's a small school or a rural diocese, and you have 30 or 40. Maybe you could probably have coffee with everybody, but if you work in a bigger setting, you can't have 500 cups of coffee a week. Which every time I do that, there's always young youth ministers in the crowd who are like, "Want to bet?" I'm gonna try it. So we feel like a big part of our job at Future of Faith is to try and help you figure your way through this. Because while we don't think that you should be having 500 cups of coffee a week, we do think that you can do relational, listening-based ministry with 500 people if you know which 5 cups of coffee you need to have this week. But again, we don't have very good tools for that. And so we've been developing at Future of Faith, again, all free. So I'm not trying to sell you anything here. This is actually a pitch for why you should come to my workshop and not the others. is this concept of sacred listening. I think it aligns super well with synodality and a lot of the larger Catholic push in that direction. We've built these sacred listening tools. If you end up going to the other workshops, it's fine. I'll tell you, you can find the tools for free on our website if you want to download them and look through them. They're not intended to replace your entire program. Instead, what we're trying to do is provide some concrete, there's like 10 or so that are up on our website. We're constantly developing more. You can download them, read through them, get the understanding of what we mean when we talk about sacred listening theory and how it scales up, out, and down and all that, which we'll get into in the workshop. But also then the real goal is that you then can develop your own. I mean, once you sort of get the framework, it's not, you don't have to keep coming back to us to do it. In fact, you could probably come up with much better things. But we took it seriously as our job to think through, like, what would it mean if sociologists, like, what would a sociologist do to help try and solve this conundrum of doing listening at scale? And so the tools are just our attempt to sort of push into that direction. But I bet we've been around enough youth ministers, especially, to know that, like, you probably are not sitting here with a blank slate, and that you get to, completely bulldoze everything that's been done and start from the ground up. And so we're not pitching to you, a wholly radically new kind of program, but rather, what are some first steps that you could take to respond to this low trust world for both parents and also for the youth who are more directly in your purview. You can read more about this and see more about, like, sort of the theory behind a lot of this at faithfulfutures.com. This is a book that I wrote, and I brought one that I'm going to give away. Who can tell me the last movie that Leo watched before becoming Pope Leo? It was Conclave. How great is that? And, like, maybe once you're Pope, maybe that's the last movie he ever watches. I don't know if you get to watch movies as Pope. Anyway, again, here's the QR code where you can go and download the slides from this presentation. I've had a great time doing this. I hope that at least piques your interest and you want to learn more. Again, I'll be doing this. At the workshop here this afternoon, we'll be walking through, very concretely, through sacred listening theory. So you'll get to learn a little bit about what the pieces are. And we're going to do a sacred listening exercise. So you can have a very concrete example of exactly what it would look like in your own ministry. Thank you, everybody.